She made her own son scrub the bathroom on his knees with a toothbrush. But when the grandmother found out and arrived at the door with trembling hands, the mother shouted, "Get out of here!" Then the entire neighborhood saw the elderly woman do something that changed that Sunday forever. How many grandmothers do you know who would face their own daughter's contempt just to protect a grandson who was already learning to suffer in silence? She had been forbidden from entering that house. But that day she walked in and brought the truth with her. Before we begin, if you love powerful, emotional stories that truly touch the heart, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Which city do you call home? Your support brings more stories that matter. Thank you so much for being here. Now let's begin. A 10-year-old boy knelt on cold tile, toothbrush in hand, tears mixing with bleach. His tiny hands trembled, punished again for a word too loud. Outside, an old woman gripped a gate with shaking fingers, heart racing. She wasn't welcome, but today she would not leave without changing everything. Landon stared through the crack of the window as the late afternoon light danced on the dusty glass. Outside, he could hear distant laughter from children playing in the street. At 12 years old, he felt much older. There was a resigned sadness in his eyes, something that didn't fit his age. Inside the room, there was only a thin mattress on the floor and a small old bookshelf where a red-covered notebook lay. It was there that he tried to scribble down his thoughts or draw what he saw outside the window. As the sun set, Landon closed the notebook and fell silent, listening to the clatter of utensils coming from the kitchen. He knew that soon, Chelsea, the woman he called Mother, would call him for some sort of chore or perhaps a punishment if her mood was dark. Lately, her mood was almost always dark. Chelsea would sporadically appear in the room, asking why Landon wasn't studying or why he hadn't cleaned the living room floor properly. No one knew for sure what fueled such strictness in her heart. Perhaps it was the memories of an abandonment she suffered in her youth, or the frustration of living a life she hadn't dreamed of. The fact was, to her, everything had to be perfect. The floor spotless, the clothes folded, total silence. Landon didn't speak much, learning early on that any misplaced word would lead to new tasks or scoldings. So, he spent his time locked in that room, observing the world through the window. On certain nights, he would whisper verses he read in old books, imagining that one day he would escape to places where Chelsea's voice didn't echo. On the other side of the city, Margaret sat in a worn armchair at the nursing home where she lived. She was 70 years old, her grey hair tied up in a loose bun. In her lap, she held a small memory box. Inside were old photos, a yellowed note, and the painful memory of a daughter who had drifted away. Margaret sighed, running her finger over the image of a baby curled up in a blanket. It had been a long time since she had seen her grandson. Every time she tried to reach out, Chelsea created a barrier, making excuses or ignoring her phone calls. In the nursing home dining room, other elderly women dined in groups, chatting about trivial matters. Margaret rarely participated in these conversations. Her body was weakened by arthritis, and above all, her heart ached from the distance between her and Landon. She held on to the hope that one day the boy would show up at her door, or that someone would help her find him. One afternoon, while she was in the nursing home garden, she received an unexpected visit from a thin man with a long face and a kind demeanor. He introduced himself as Mr. Donovan and explained that he was Chelsea's neighbor. He said he had occasionally heard screams and seen Landon in uncomfortable situations. He stated that he couldn't remain silent. Margaret felt her heart race. She wanted information. She wanted to know how her grandson was doing. Donovan reported that Landon seemed like a quiet boy, but lived in isolation. Margaret bit her lips, holding back tears. She thanked Mr. Donovan profusely. That very night, She rifled through her belongings, searching for documents and letters that could prove their family bond. She feared that Chelsea would deny any approach. But before taking any official steps, she needed to see Landon with her own eyes. Meanwhile, in the house with closed windows, Landon finished writing a few lines about freedom in his notebook. He heard footsteps in the hallway. The door swung open forcefully, and Chelsea, with a stern expression, asked if he was mulling over bad ideas. The boy simply shook his head, rubbing his sweaty hands. She complained that the dinner dishes weren't perfectly clean. "Why can't you do anything right?" Her voice was cold. He lowered his gaze, feeling a lump in his throat. He wanted to ask why she was so unhappy, but he didn't dare speak. As he stood up, he grabbed the notebook and hid it under his pillow. "Get down now," she ordered, "and don't take long." Landon left the room, feeling the weight of a grey routine. Outside, a last thread of light illuminated the street, almost like a wave of hope. As he walked down the hallway, he heard the laughter of children passing by the gate. He felt envy at how life outside seemed so simple. At that very moment, Margaret was closing her memory box at the nursing home, thinking that she needed to act. She felt that her grandson was in danger, or at least suffering. She needed to rescue him from this oppressive silence. Thus ended another day when grandmother and grandson shared the same longing, though separated by walls, hurts, and secrets that no one dared to touch. The sun disappeared completely, and neither of them imagined that soon their lives would collide, forcing them to reveal old pains and perhaps seek a chance for a fresh start. The next day dawned with heavy clouds in the sky, as if announcing a storm. Landon woke up before Chelsea, taking the opportunity to finish washing the dishes from the previous night and avoid more sermons. While scrubbing the plates, he heard heavy footsteps. It was her appearing in the kitchen with a disapproving look. "Don't make noise," she said, skipping the "good morning. "And don't take too long. We have things to sort out." He nodded silently. As soon as he finished, he rushed to the gate to empty the trash. While walking through the untidy garden, he spotted Mr. Donovan across the street. The man raised a hand in a discreet greeting, but didn't dare to speak. He had noticed for some time the tension surrounding that house. Landon responded with a shy wave, grateful for any kind of kindness, even if it was silent. Back in the kitchen, Chelsea piled some clothes into the boy's hands, ordering him to take them to the clothesline in the backyard. The sky grew darker, and thunder rumbled in the distance. "If it rains and those clothes get wet, it'll be your fault," she said mercilessly. Landon ran to the backyard, hanging each piece while staring at the heavy sky. The clothes swayed in the wind as the first drops began to fall. It was then that he heard a louder crash and Chelsea's harsh voice. "Come now, you haven't swept the hallway yet." He rushed inside, and as he passed through the living room, Mr. Donovan appeared, knocking on the half-open door. Chelsea, irritated by the rain that was beginning to intensify, peeked through the crack. "What do you want?" she asked, her rudeness evident. "Sorry." Donovan cleared his throat. "I just came to let you know I dropped my tool in your yard yesterday." "Can I retrieve it?" Chelsea stared at him disdainfully, but before she could refuse, Landon appeared next to her, holding a mop. Donovan noticed the boy's downcast eyes and tried to smile to reassure him. "I don't see anything around here," Chelsea said, lacking any willingness to help. "If you lost something, look harder, and please don't knock on my door without reason again." The man stepped back, casting a sympathetic glance at Landon. As Chelsea shut the door, she let out an irritated sigh and dropped a list of chores on the table. "Sweep the hallway, clean the bathroom, then tidy your room, and if I find any dust, you'll see." While the boy rummaged through the closet for the broom, the storm intensified. Lightning streaked across the sky, and each thunderclap made the windows shake. Amid the clamor, Landon headed to the bathroom. There, he recalled the countless times he had been forced to scrub the floor on his knees as punishment for some insignificant mistake. He started cleaning, but suddenly he heard Chelsea's voice from afar. "If you think finishing this quickly will get you out of a lesson, you're mistaken." He swallowed hard. He knew arguing was pointless. He carefully wiped the floor, avoiding soap splashes on his clothes. A small puddle formed behind him, but he didn't notice. He took a misstep and nearly slipped, grabbing the sink for support, his heart racing. He couldn't even imagine the scolding he would receive if he broke something. Almost done with the task, a grey head appeared in the bathroom window. The boy startled at seeing Mr. Donovan again, but the man simply made a calming gesture. He seemed to want to check if Landon was okay. "Everything all right in there?" he whispered, concerned. "You can't talk to me like that," the boy replied, barely moving his lips, fearing Chelsea would overhear. "Sorry, I just wanted to help." Landon shrugged and continued scrubbing. Donovan disappeared shortly after. The rain pounded hard against the roof as the boy finished cleaning, praying Chelsea wouldn't find any faults. Meanwhile, the woman checked the clothes on the line, now soaked from the storm. When she returned to the house, she exploded. "You're truly useless. You can't even hang clothes properly. Now I'll have to wash everything again." Landon lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of guilt. He wanted to say that she had ordered him to hang the clothes despite the approaching storm, but he remained silent. Inside that house, words could hurt more than any lightning strike. Mr. Donovan, sitting on his porch, could hear the insults through the thin walls. He knew something was very wrong in that relationship. He decided that the next day he would speak with Margaret again, as he believed she was the only one who genuinely cared for the boy. For Donovan, it would only take a small step for everything to begin to change. Margaret sat in a wheelchair at the nursing home, watching the rain trickle down the common room window. Her heart raced. She had spent the previous night awake, recalling how Chelsea used to be decades ago, an insecure but affectionate teenager. She couldn't understand where everything had gone wrong. Mr. Donovan arrived, shaking off a dripping umbrella. He greeted the nurses and approached Margaret with a worried expression. He explained that he had been witnessing disturbing incidents and feared for Landon's emotional well-being. Upon hearing this, Margaret felt her hands tremble. She needed to take action. I don't really know what to do," she confessed, her voice wavering. "I've tried to reach out so many times, but Chelsea always pushes me away. If you don't do something, I fear the boy will suffer even more," Donovan replied firmly. Margaret took a deep breath. She looked down at her wrinkled hands. Her joints ached, but she knew that this pain was nothing compared to what her grandson might be facing. So, she decided, she would ask for help from a social worker at the nursing home to initiate some legal process. By noon, the wind had calmed, and the rain showed signs of letting up. Margaret called a taxi and, with the help of a caregiver, settled into the back seat. She headed straight to Chelsea's address. Her heart felt like a drum in her chest. Each block brought back distant memories. The day she took Chelsea to school for the first time, the moment they celebrated the girl's 10th birthday together. All of that seemed to belong to another life. Upon arriving, she struggled to get out of the car. The asphalt was still wet and the clouds remained heavy. She approached the rusty gate and rang the doorbell. No answer. The house had its windows closed. As always, she knocked on the wooden door, waiting. She just wanted to see Landon, to make sure he was alive and well. Seconds later, Chelsea opened the door, revealing her displeasure without hesitation. She wore a bitter expression, as if she had been awakened from a bad dream. "What are you doing here?" was the first thing out of her mouth, cold as the wind blowing outside. Margaret tried to stay calm. "I came to talk about Landon. I believe he needs different care." "You have no idea what we need," her daughter shot back, raising her voice. Go home, Mum. I've told you 1,000 times that I don't want your input. Just let me see my grandson. Just 5 minutes. Chelsea glanced around, noticing that some neighbors were watching, including Mr. Donovan, who pretended to sweep the sidewalk. With a flash of anger in her eyes, she responded, "I'm not letting you in, and do me a favor. Don't come back." Margaret fought against the urge to cry. She needed to maintain her dignity. She pulled an envelope from her pocket containing documents and a brief report about Landon's situation. "I won't give up. And this envelope," she raised it, "it's my petition for temporary custody until we resolve this situation." At that moment, Landon peeked through a crack in the window. He recognized his grandmother, but didn't have the courage to wave. Chelsea turned to see what had caught Margaret's attention, and upon noticing the boy's anxious expression, she stepped toward the porch. "Go back to your room, Landon, now." Margaret took a deep breath. "You can close that door today, but you won't shut my eyes again. I won't leave your life like this." Her daughter glared at her, furious, and slammed the door shut. The sound echoed down the street, and Margaret stood there for a moment, feeling pressure in her chest. With effort, she turned away. Donovan set down the broom and approached, helping her down the steps. Some onlookers whispered, while others simply watched in silence. "I knew this wouldn't be easy," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "But there's no more time to waste." Donovan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were brave. I don't know how, but I'll help." "That boy can't go on like this." Margaret managed a sad smile. That closed door, which once symbolized family, now felt insurmountable. Deep down, she understood. To break through these walls of silence and aggression, it might take more than just words. She just didn't realize that soon, the whole truth would begin to surface, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next day, Landon mustered the courage to leave the house early before Chelsea woke up. He told himself he needed to breathe different air, even if only for a few minutes. He put on his oldest hoodie and walked through the still wet streets from the previous night's rain. The timid sun was rising, revealing shiny puddles on the asphalt. He made his way to a nearby park, which was mostly empty at that hour. In the center of the park stood a large oak tree, its yellowing leaves beginning to fall. Landon approached it, feeling small in front of the thick trunk. It was then that he heard a faint voice calling his name. "Landon, I'm here." It was Margaret, sitting on a wooden bench with a blanket over her legs. Next to her was a cane, a testament to her struggles with movement. Landon's heart raced. He had never imagined seeing her there, away from the nursing home. He feared his mom might show up at any moment, but he still felt an overwhelming sense of relief. "Grandma?" He stepped closer, almost in disbelief. "You really came." "I couldn't leave yesterday without trying to talk to you," she said, holding her grandson's hand. "Would you like to sit?" He glanced around anxiously, but eventually gave in and sat on the bench beside her. The rough texture of the wood seemed irrelevant compared to the warmth he felt seeing his grandmother again. Margaret observed him, his thin face, deep circles under his eyes, and a tense posture. "Are you okay, my dear?" Her voice was thick with emotion. Landon hesitated. He wanted to say yes to avoid worrying her, but everything inside him screamed the opposite. "Mom has been really stressed." Margaret looked down. "I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to Chelsea's heart. She wasn't always like this." The boy shrugged, trying to hold back his emotions. "I think I'm not a good son. Maybe it's my fault." "Don't say that." Margaret squeezed his hands. "You're not to blame. There are things in life that are beyond our control." For a few minutes they sat in silence, simply watching the first rays of sun break through the oak's canopy. The distant song of a bird filled the air with lightness. Then Margaret began to share little stories about Chelsea as a child. She recalled how her daughter once danced in a school competition and was so happy that she couldn't stop smiling for days. She talked about playing in the backyard and the times they made cakes together. "Maybe she's lost," Margaret said. But who knows? With patience we might find her again." "I don't know if she wants to be found," Landon remarked, thinking of the repetitive punishments and the daily coldness. "Just don't keep all of this to yourself, my grandson. There are people who care." They exchanged understanding looks. Landon felt a tear welling up. He needed to ask something that had been tormenting him. "Grandma, why did you distance yourself from us? When I was younger, I remember you being at home. Then suddenly you weren't coming anymore." Margaret exhaled deeply. "I didn't choose to distance myself, but there were conflicts, fights. Chelsea has always been very headstrong. There was an incident that separated us for good. Maybe one day you'll understand completely, but I promise, Landon, I won't disappear again." He wiped his face, hopeful yet insecure. "I'm afraid Mum will find out we met." "I know, that's why we need to be careful. But I will try to find a way to protect you." Then Margaret looked at him firmly. "I just need you to promise that if anything bad happens, you'll let me know." He nodded. When he stood up to leave, Margaret held his arm and pulled out a small package from her bag. "Here, it's a snack I made at the nursing home." "I know you barely eat at home." Landon thanked her, his voice trembling. He stuffed the package into his pocket and ran back before Chelsea noticed his absence. As he ran, his legs felt light, as if that brief conversation had strengthened him from within. Deep down, he knew something was about to change. Maybe it was just hope, but for the first time in a long time, hope felt like a living flame. Watching her grandson retreat, Margaret sighed. She needed to act quickly. She couldn't allow Landon to be swallowed by the indifference and rigidity of Chelsea. She decided that, still that week, she would seek more concrete legal advice. She would take a definitive step to rescue the boy from the shadows of that closed-off house. What she didn't realize was that by pulling on this thread, she would uncover secrets that would put their entire past into question. Upon returning home, Landon hid the food package under the mattress, intending to open it later. Chelsea was still asleep, exhausted after a restless night, filled with complaints about headaches and the noise from the rain. He seized the moment of peace to wash the living room floor, trying to get ahead of the inevitable demands. While cleaning, he heard something vibrating on the sofa. It was Chelsea's phone receiving messages. He wouldn't dare to touch it, but he couldn't help but notice the aggressive tone of the notifications appearing on the locked screen. Phrases like, "How dare you," and "You'll regret this," left Landon feeling uneasy. Perhaps it was someone complaining about a debt or an old grudge. He looked away, feeling intrusive. By noon, Chelsea awoke in a foul mood, complaining about the brightness and the heat. She demanded that Landon close all the windows, turning the house into a sort of claustrophobic prison. Meanwhile, Landon discovered that she planned to go out to resolve personal matters. He knew that meant he'd be alone, but he didn't mind. At least he could breathe without being judged every second. Shortly after, Chelsea left, slamming the door. As silence enveloped the house, Landon felt an immediate sense of relief. He went to his room, grabbed the package his grandmother had given him, and ate half of a sandwich. It tasted like comfort. After finishing, he saved the rest for later. He needed to savor that good feeling. It was almost 1 in the afternoon when he heard a soft knock at the front door. He hesitated, fearing it was his mother returning. Peeking through the window, he saw an unfamiliar woman holding a clipboard. When she noticed someone was watching, she waved. "Hello, my name is Regina. I work for social services. Can I speak with Chelsea?" Landon froze. His heart raced. "My mom isn't home." "I understand." The woman flipped through some papers. "Could you open the door so we can talk a bit?" He hesitated. He knew Chelsea would hate it if he let a stranger in, but the woman's voice sounded gentle, and something told him she had come because of Margaret. After a few seconds, he unlocked the door and opened it slightly. The social worker smiled, trying to show empathy. "I was informed that there might be some issues in this home. I'm sorry to bother you, but it's part of my job to check if everything is all right." "It's fine." Landon tried to sound convincing, but his own expression of insecurity betrayed him. Regina observed the hallway, noticing the sealed windows and the stuffy air. "Could you answer a few questions? I don't want to cause you any trouble." He took a deep breath and let her in. The house was relatively tidy, but there was a heavy feeling in the air. The social worker asked about his routine, about how things were with his mother. Landon, overwhelmed by fear, limited his answers to short, almost automatic responses. "It's fine. She works. Sometimes she gets upset." Noticing the boy's reluctance, Regina commented, "I met your grandmother, Margaret. She seems very worried about you." Hearing his grandmother's name made Landon feel tears welling up. He swallowed hard. "I really like her. So it's true that you two have lost contact." Regina tilted her head, noticing how Landon struggled to hold back his emotions. "Look, I'm not going to force you to say anything, but if something bad is happening, there are people who can help." Landon looked down at the floor. He wanted to talk about the punishments, about the yelling, but he was afraid of the consequences. Still, he managed to say in a low voice, "It's not easy." Before he could continue, they heard the sound of the gate opening. Chelsea was back. Regina shot a warning glance and stood up. The door swung open with a bang, and upon seeing the social worker there, Chelsea clenched her jaw, glaring at Landon. "What is this woman doing in my house?" Chelsea's voice dripped with anger. Regina tried to explain calmly, but Chelsea didn't listen. She ordered her to leave immediately and threatened to report trespassing. The social worker gathered her papers and left, promising to return with a formal order. Landon, meanwhile, shrank against the wall, fearing what would come next. As soon as Regina was gone, Chelsea turned on her son with a coldness he would never forget. "So you've been opening the door for nosy people? I'll teach you to be more obedient." He felt his body freeze. Grabbing his notebook from the table, he held it against his chest like a shield. He knew that from then on, things would only get worse. He needed to find a way to prove he deserved help without his mother shattering his last remnants of courage. The situation escalated that night. Chelsea snatched the notebook from Landon's hands and locked it away in a cabinet, claiming it was a source of bad ideas. The boy was forced to scrub the bathroom on his knees once again, now under the threat of missing dinner if he didn't do it perfectly. After hours of work, he sat on the floor of his room, breathless, feeling his legs go numb. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Margaret was gathering information and documents to proceed with her request for temporary custody. She handed everything over to social worker Regina, hoping the court would act quickly. She also shared what she knew about Chelsea's psychological history, but there were dark gaps concerning her daughter's past. The following day, Landon seized an opportunity to leave the house and went to a quiet alley, where he found Mr. Donovan and, unexpectedly, Regina. They set up an emergency support system so that the boy could report concrete facts. With a trembling voice, Landon detailed some of the punishments and mentioned hearing Chelsea murmur about a family secret that left her resentful. "She blames my grandmother for something," he whispered. But she never explained what happened. Donovan and Regina exchanged glances. They knew they would need more than verbal accusations to convince the courts. So, Regina handed him a small tape recorder. "If you feel in danger or hear something important, use this. But please, be careful." Landon accepted it, his hands sweaty, feeling torn between fear and the determination to change his life. He returned home that afternoon, praying not to be discovered. A few days passed in a suffocating rhythm. Chelsea, suspicious, watched every move her son made. But one morning, while she was on the phone in the hallway, complaining about old debts, Landon turned on the recorder, hidden in the pocket of his hoodie. Suddenly he heard her scream something about that old woman who ruined my life and now wants to steal my son. The boy trembled but pressed on. He captured snippets where Chelsea accused Margaret of having destroyed the only chance of happiness she ever had in her youth. She also spoke of a father who never took responsibility. Later, in his room, Landon listened to the recording. He needed to gather the courage to hand it over to Regina or his grandmother. But every syllable revealed that there was something deep, some ancient wound that explained Chelsea's behavior. In the last recorded words, his mother let slip a name. He should have been the father, but he ran away. My sister paid the price, and now, where is she? Dead. That sounded like a significant revelation. Landon wasn't sure which sister she was referring to. He had few memories of the past, and Margaret never spoke of anyone else in the family. Some tragedies seemed to be at the heart of the pain that consumed Chelsea. He felt both pity and fear at the same time. Just before going to bed, the boy found an opportunity to sneak out discreetly to the backyard. He took advantage of a gap in the wall to meet Donovan, who lived right next door. He handed over the recorder. "Please take this. I can't risk her finding it." Donovan nodded. "I'll deliver it to Regina." When Landon returned to his room, he noticed Chelsea was furious, searching through drawers. "Where have you been?" she roared. "And what are you hiding?" "Nothing, Mom." He tried to stay calm. "I just went to the bathroom." She glared at him with narrowed eyes, as if she could smell his fear. "If I find out you're lying, you'll regret it." He was certain that if he didn't act quickly, he would be trapped in that cycle forever. However, he didn't realize that by exposing the recording, he would unearth even deeper wounds. There was a past involving deaths and abandonment that would change everything he believed he knew about himself. The next morning, Margaret received a phone call from Regina discussing the existence of a recorded audio. The grandmother had a dark premonition. They might be on the brink of discovering why Chelsea harbored such intense anger. She just didn't expect the truth to be so harsh, or that part of the blame would fall on her own shoulders. 3 weeks later, the social worker obtained a court order for Chelsea to appear at a preliminary hearing regarding the custody of Landon. The local court, modest yet efficient, scheduled the date for a Friday afternoon. Tension enveloped everyone involved. Margaret, despite her pain, insisted on attending. She arrived by taxi using a cane for support. Her eyes were heavy with worry and expectation, but also with contained guilt. She wasn't sure what would be revealed that day. Donovan accompanied her in silence, ready to testify if necessary. When Landon entered the courtroom beside Chelsea, he avoided looking directly at his mother. He sat down, his hands trembling slightly. Behind a bench, a judge with a serene yet firm expression reviewed the paperwork. Regina, representing social services, began to recount what had been discovered. Allegations of abuse, Chelsea's hostile behavior, recordings indicating threats, and secrets about a possible paternal abandonment. Chelsea interrupted, slamming her hand on the table. "This is all a great injustice. My son is being manipulated by my mother, who never truly supported me." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Chelsea, I ask that you maintain order. You will have time to defend yourself." Margaret watched Landon, who was staring at the floor. She wanted to stand up, hug him, and tell him everything would be okay. But she knew this was a formal process. She had to follow the rules. When she finally received permission to speak, her voice trembled. "Your Honor, I'm not trying to take my grandson away from anyone. I just want to protect him. I fear that he is not being cared for properly. I have evidence and witnesses that he suffers emotional abuse." Chelsea rolled her eyes but said nothing. The judge requested that Landon be heard. The boy stood up and approached the microphone. His voice barely emerged at first, but after taking a deep breath, he began, "I don't really know how to explain. I like studying, but my mom says I'm always messing things up. I can hardly ever see my friends or be free. She punishes me if anything isn't perfect." He swallowed hard. "Grandma, she's the only one who listens to me." The judge looked at him with compassion. "Do you feel safe in the home where you live?" "I don't feel safe." It was a short answer, but it carried a weight of sadness. Chelsea scoffed, crossing her arms. "He's been influenced by this old woman. He doesn't know what he's saying." "I raised this boy, and now they want to accuse me," Regina asked to speak. "The recordings indicate that you harbor a deep resentment towards Margaret. Could you explain that?" Chelsea averted her gaze. "My mother ruined my life. When I was a teenager, I got pregnant, and she forced me to give the baby up to my sister. A decision I've never gotten over." Her eyes filled with tears held back by anger. A murmur spread through the room. Margaret remained frozen, unsure how to react. It had indeed been a tumultuous moment in the past, but she didn't remember things exactly that way. Or perhaps she didn't want to remember. The judge requested calm. "Given the nature of this accusation, we need additional clarification. Mr. Landon, is it true that Ms. Chelsea is not your biological mother?" The boy looked at Margaret, confused. "I always thought I was. No one ever told me otherwise." Chelsea closed her eyes, letting out a heavy sigh. "He is my sister's son. She died and I took custody, but it ruined my youth. I was forced to care for a baby that wasn't mine because of Margaret." Landon stepped back, feeling the ground shift beneath him. A buzzing echoed in his ears. "So, I'm not your son?" he asked, his voice trembling. Chelsea lowered her head. "Biologically, no." The silence in the room became deafening. The judge shook her head, dismayed by the revelation. Margaret tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Through tear-filled eyes, Landon saw the entire structure of his life crumble. He felt like a stranger in his own story. In the midst of this turmoil, the judge suspended the session for DNA tests and further testimonies. Landon was taken aside to speak privately with Regina. Chelsea left the room, crying in anger, while Margaret sank into her chair, confused and overwhelmed with regret. No one expected that behind each cruel punishment lay such a deep resentment, and now it was too late to turn back. The next hearing took place 2 weeks later, enough time for DNA tests to confirm that Landon was indeed the son of Chelsea's deceased sister. Margaret was shaken as she recalled the tragedy that had claimed her other daughter so young. She discovered, with pain, that Chelsea had taken on the boy without ever wanting to, carrying him like a burden. In court, after hearing new testimonies, the judge granted temporary custody to Margaret. Chelsea protested, but the magistrate cited clear evidence of psychological and even physical abuse. Landon, sitting quietly in a corner, felt a mix of relief and guilt. He didn't want to hurt Chelsea, but he also feared returning to the dark, suffocating home. When the session ended, Margaret approached her grandson and extended her hand. He took it, still unsure about the future. That night, they moved into a small rented house facing a tree-lined street. It wasn't large, but it had big windows and a room just for him, with light beige walls. In the first few days, Landon hardly spoke. He seemed to be processing the flood of information about his origins. Margaret tried to respect his pace but cooked warm meals and insisted on sitting next to him while they ate. It was during a silent dinner that he dared to ask, "Did you know I was my aunt's son? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Margaret put down her fork and took a deep breath. I did know. But I believed that one day Chelsea would learn to love you as a son, if she didn't already. The circumstances were very confusing. I'm so sorry for leaving you in the dark. He frowned but didn't argue. He was tired of confrontations. Deep down, he appreciated this peaceful moment where there were no insults or orders. The next day, they decided to go to the local market to buy fruits. Margaret walked slowly, leaning on her cane. Landon instinctively held her arm to offer stability. As they picked apples and vegetables, some people looked at them curiously, soon noticing the bond between grandmother and grandson. Despite her pain, Margaret wore a genuine smile as she watched Landon point at a bunch of grapes. That scene, so simple, felt like a triumph after so many months of darkness. A few days later, Landon returned to the local school, trying to adjust to teachers and classmates. He carried a mix of shame and hope inside him. During recess, he avoided talking about the past. He preferred to sit in the courtyard and draw, recalling the scribbles he had made in the notebook confiscated by Chelsea. One afternoon, when he got home, he found Margaret on the sofa, groaning in pain. She explained that she suffered from arthritis, but her joints seemed worse. Even so, she smiled, saying everything would be fine. He insisted she go to the doctor. I'll make an appointment, she said, stroking the boy's hair. See you, but don't worry, I'm happy to be here with you. They went to the doctor's office, where the doctor prescribed anti-inflammatories and recommended physical therapy. Landon grew worried. His grandmother was already sacrificing so much to give him a decent home. He decided he would start washing cars in the neighborhood to save some money. He wanted to help. Meanwhile, Chelsea remained isolated. She didn't answer calls and kept her distance. There were rumors that she had quit her job at the beauty salon and spent hours locked in a room, consumed by bitterness. Mr. Donovan visited Margaret, saying he had seen the woman wandering the streets at odd hours. Maybe she's regretting it but doesn't know how to fix everything, Donovan commented. Margaret sighed. I've made many mistakes too. It doesn't help to blame only her. The pain we carry sometimes blinds us. Despite this, she felt a small relief knowing Landon was safe. Now the house occasionally echoed with laughter, which was something new for the boy. There was also the warmth of a grandmother determined to finally offer him genuine affection. One Saturday morning, while having breakfast, Margaret said, "Are you thinking about trying something new at school? Maybe a club?" He pondered. "I like drawing. I saw there's an art group, but I don't know if I'm good enough." The grandmother smiled and placed a new pencil in front of him. "You won't know until you try." It was a simple gesture, but it symbolized a lot. The possibility of rebuilding their lives, free from the shouts and punishments of the past. Together, grandmother and grandson began to piece together the fragments of their stories, hoping that the wounds would heal and that the sun would finally shine in a home where, for the first time, there was more love than resentment. 5 years had passed since Landon moved in with Margaret. Now 17, he worked part-time at a small community library run by neighborhood volunteers. Despite his school routine, he found time to immerse himself in books and the arts. His demeanor had changed. He remained shy but showed more confidence and independence. Margaret, on the other hand, continued to struggle with her health, but her physical therapy sessions kept her stable. She took pride in seeing her grandson carve his own path, despite all the pain they had endured. The house, once silent, now brimmed with life from Landon's paintings and flowers in the window that he tended to brighten the atmosphere. One night, Landon offered to close the library. The coordinator had left early, and he relished the quiet as he organized the shelves. He enjoyed reading snippets from the books, softly reciting poetry. That was when he heard the door creak. even though he had already turned the sign to closed. Sorry, we're not open anymore, he said, not lifting his eyes from the counter. But when he looked up, his heart sank. It was Chelsea. She stood there, no makeup, dressed simply, appearing vastly different from the authoritative woman she once was. She looked pale, tired, and above all, vulnerable. Landon dropped the book he was holding, nearly letting it fall. "Mom," was the first word that escaped his lips, even though addressing her that way felt strange after everything. She stepped closer, rubbing her hands together as if cold. I'm sorry for barging in like this. I needed a book, something about..." She hesitated. "I need help." Landon blinked, taken aback. "Help? In what way?" "I don't know how to explain it," she continued, her voice shaky. "Something about healing the heart, I guess. I thought the library might have a book that talks about new beginnings." He swallowed hard. He wasn't sure whether to laugh, cry, or feel anger. Part of him felt a twinge of pity, seeing her so different from the harsh mother who had caused him so much pain. He fell silent for a moment, then stepped out from behind the counter and walked to the self-help section. He pulled out a book titled Rebuilding Emotions. "Maybe this one," he said, handing her the book. Chelsea held the volume with trembling hands. Her eyes finally met Landon's. "You've grown so much," she murmured, almost a whisper. I'm really sorry for everything." He didn't respond immediately. He saw genuine pain on his mother's face. He thought about asking why she had come now, after all this time, but something told him she was on the verge of breaking down. "It's okay." His voice came out hesitantly. I don't know if it's okay, but I'm working here." She pressed the book against her chest. "Landon, I've done so many wrong things. You must hate me." He looked down at the polished wooden floor. He didn't feel hate, but a sadness that throbbed. "I just wished things had been different, that you had been happy. If you had been, maybe I would have been too." She bit her lip, fighting back tears. "I don't have the right to ask you for anything. I just needed to see your face. I wanted to apologize." Landon sighed, unsure how to react. Before he could say anything else, Chelsea took a step back, seeming embarrassed. She thanked him for the book and turned to leave, but at the door, she paused for a moment, whispering, "Thank you for existing." He stood there, frozen, his heart racing as she disappeared into the darkness outside. That's when he noticed his grandmother standing nearby, watching everything from a safe distance. Margaret didn't intervene. She simply let the moment unfold. As Landon closed the door, he faced his grandmother and exchanged a look of confusion. "Are you okay, dear?" she asked, touching his arm. "I don't know," he replied, "but I think she's changed." Margaret nodded. "Perhaps time has worked on her wounds. Do you want to talk about it?" He shook his head, still unable to organize his thoughts. He locked up the library, and they walked in silence back to the house, each lost in a sea of memories and fears. In the air hung the sense that some reconciliation was dawning, even though distance and pain still lingered. What Landon didn't realize was that soon the entire past would be exposed in an even more impactful way, forever altering the course of everyone's lives. 5 more years had passed. Landon, now 22, had completed a degree in psychology and was specializing in child counseling. He worked at a small community center that provided support to young people in vulnerable situations, something he deeply identified with given his own life story. Margaret, although older and with delicate health, beamed with pride at every achievement of her grandson, thrilled to see him walking a path of empathy and resilience. One afternoon, Landon was invited to give a lecture in a local auditorium on how family love can transform destinies. He prepared a simple yet sincere presentation, bringing along drawings and notes he had made over the years. When the day arrived, the room was packed with teachers, social workers, some parents, and a few curious onlookers. He stepped onto the stage, adjusted the microphone, and felt a tightness in his throat. Scanning the audience, he spotted Margaret in the front row, smiling with a glimmer of emotion in her eyes. He also saw Mr. Donovan, now greyer, sitting near the aisle. Further back, a familiar silhouette caught his attention. Chelsea, leaning against the wall, almost hiding. His heart raced. But he decided it was time to confront the past. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Landon, and I'm going to talk about new beginnings, he started, his voice trembling. I grew up in a home where love and pain intertwined. For a long time, I thought the problem was me, that I didn't deserve affection, but I discovered that sometimes those who hurt us also carry their own wounds. A few people shifted in their seats, touched by his introduction. He continued sharing parts of his story, not explicitly naming anyone, but describing the rigidity, the punishments, the pain of realizing he wasn't who he thought he was. Then he spoke about the grandmother who appeared to rescue him from neglect and silence, offering him a second chance to have a home with open windows. Landon took a deep breath, feeling his eyes welling up. Today, I work with children who come from shattered homes. I see in them the same look I once had, filled with fear and uncertainty. But I also witness hope blossoming when they find someone willing to extend a hand. As he concluded, the audience erupted in energetic applause. Many people stood up to hug him or praise him. Margaret wiped her tears, smiling. Then, Landon noticed Chelsea slowly approaching, her head down. She didn't dare to hug him there, but extended a small note. With trembling hands, he took the paper and read silently. "Thank you for becoming everything I couldn't be. I never said it, but I love you, son." The young man felt his legs tremble. This was the first time Chelsea had used the word son so clearly and affectionately. He lifted his gaze to her, who let a silent tear fall. Everything seemed to freeze around them. There was an unspoken apology, something he had waited his whole life to hear. Margaret, who had been watching, approached and touched Chelsea's shoulder. The two exchanged a long look, filled with memories and past pains, but also with hope. Then the elderly woman turned to her grandson, eager to see what he would do next. Landon extended his hand, and Chelsea, hesitant, took it. There was no magical solution for all the wounds, but in that simple gesture lay a huge step toward reconciliation. "Can we talk another time?" Chelsea asked, her voice hoarse. "Of course." "Whenever you want," Landon replied, still holding the note. They shared a moment of silence for a few seconds, until Chelsea discreetly stepped away. Landon noticed she seemed less bitter, perhaps ready for a new chapter in her life. The auditorium then buzzed again, and he turned to attend to those who wanted to congratulate him on his lecture. In the end, he tucked the note into his coat pocket and walked over to Margaret, who was waiting for him with a smile. "You were amazing," she said, tears of pride in her eyes. "All thanks to you, Grandma," he replied, hugging her. "Thank you for never giving up on me." They walked out together, arm in arm, as the late afternoon sun illuminated the empty parking lot. They felt that despite their scars, true love could indeed heal what once seemed impossible. In that moment, each of them accepted that the past couldn't be changed, but the future finally seemed promising. And for the first time in a long while, Landon felt whole, free to be whoever he wanted, surrounded by the people who, despite all the mistakes and secrets, could still be called family. This story reminds us that love doesn't always come from where we expect it, but when it does, it has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Landon's journey showed that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but choosing to break the cycle of pain. And sometimes, the most broken people can still find redemption, not by changing the past, but by choosing love in the present. What about you? Have you ever held on to a pain that shaped your life until someone showed you love, Or do you know someone who deserves a second chance? Tell us in the comments. What did this story mean to you? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, leave a like, and comment which country or city you're watching from. We love hearing from our global family. And don't stop here. Click on the video that's now on your screen to watch another emotional and unforgettable story that will move you even more. Thank you so much for watching. Your presence means everything to us.